Hello everyone and welcome to the Mastering series. In today's episode, we will be mastering Plato, or at least trying to. This episode will be sectioned into an introduction to Plato and then a deeper look into his magnet, painter, and cave allegories. Now, some of you might be familiar with this famous painting by Italian Renaissance artist Raphael, The School of Athens. If you zoom right into the center of the painting, this is where you will find our man Plato, the person considered to be one of the most foundational thinkers and philosophers of Western civilization. Now, one of the most widely discussed ideology of Plato is his perception of poetry and the arts. He's famous for saying something along the lines of, "Poetry be gone, but I still love you, Homer." Just a disclaimer that these are not his direct words, just my personal impression of the philosopher. Plato also famously claimed that poetry should be subject to heavy censorship for a healthy education of the youth and the healthy construction of a civil society. The extent of Plato's influence can be seen through how 4 influential literary figures wrote a defense for poetry in response to Plato's criticism of it. These include Aristotle, one of his students, Sir Philip Sidney, Aphra Behn, and Percy Shelley. Plato's writing is structured in the form of Elenchus, a sort of cross-examination dialogue where an idea is explored one question at a time, calling on logical reasoning and the elimination of contradictions. Another core Platonian ideology is the theory of forms. For Plato, the forms constitute a realm of unchanging being to which the world of individual mutual objects, basically our material world, is subordinate. Plato believes that because the forms are immutable, they are more real and more true than the changeable material world. Now that's enough for the introduction. Let's move on to Plato's magnet allegory. In this allegory from Plato's book of Ion, Plato's speaker, Socrates, describes the image of a magnet attracting an object. He explains that this magnet is a god using his or her divine powers on an object which represents the poet. The magnetic pull of the magnet operates through the poet to draw in other objects. Plato's Socrates explains that these are the people inspired by the poetry. Like how the magnetic power belongs to the magnet and not the first object pulled into it, Plato's Socrates explains that none of the epic poets, if they're good, are masters of their subject. They are inspired, possessed, and that is how they utter all those beautiful poems. In other words, all true poets are divinely possessed, where true poetry cannot be created from human beings, only imitated from the divine or the forms. That brings us to Plato's famous ideology of mimesis, or imitation, which is explored through the painter allegory. This allegory is from Book 10 of the Republic, where Plato's Socrates expands on the idea of mimesis, or imitation, by explaining the process of a carpenter using nature's ingredients to create a bed, which an artist then uses as a model of reference for his painting of the bed. As we've previously discussed in the theory of forms, the tree, a mutable material object, is already once removed from the divine unchanging forms. The form is then twice removed when the carpenter carves the tree into a bed, and then thrice removed when the artist recreates the bed with different colors and dimensions within his painting. Using this example, Plato's Socrates explains how all arts, including poetry, is thrice removed from the true and the divine forms, and therefore is in a distorted form constituted of lies which can morally corrupt people. This reflects Plato's fear and distrust of poetry and is the reason behind his firm belief that poetry should be censored so that only the truly divine forms can be left for the public to safely consume. Another allegory which visualizes the idea of forms and truth is the cave allegory. Let's give the setting a little bit of a change. Sweet! The cave is from Book 7 of the Republic. We have, again, Plato's Socrates illustrating a mysterious cave. The only source of light in this cave is a fire behind a partition where a puppeteer remains hidden while manipulating puppets above the partition, creating shadows on the wall. On the other side of this wall is a prisoner bound since childhood, only able to face and perceive the shadows created by the puppeteer. The shadows are distorted and do not reveal the original colors and details of the puppets. One day, the prisoner is unbound from the chains and is forced to go towards the outside world of sunlight. The journey is extremely painful to the prisoner's eyes, being blinded by the fire and then the sunlight, and the extreme brightness making the prisoner unable to see anything at all. Plato's Socrates explains that the outside world is the realm of forms, or the truth, whereas the chained world of shadows is the material, distorted world that we live in. Just as the prisoner experiences extreme pain and discomfort from the blinding light, discovering and facing the truth is a painful journey which brings us discomfort. One might wish to return back to the chained state of ignorance and stubbornness back inside the cave. Book 7 also describes how the longer the prisoner spends outside the cave, the more he will adjust and perceive the beauty of the colorful world outside, while pitying all the other prisoners who remain inside the cave. Though the truth opens the prisoner's eyes to the world of forms, it dims his vision when he returns to the darkness of the cave, being unable to clearly see as he used to in the distorted world of shadows. Now, let's return back outside the cave to wrap up the episode. In today's episode of Mastering Plato, we explored the terms Elenchus, forms, and mimesis, as well as the allegories of the magnet, painter, and the cave, which brings us to the end of our time with Mr. Plato. Yay! And with that, we're one step closer to mastering Plato. See you next time!